want to welcome a number of new subscribers after the last video with Paulogia, where Paul and I were talking about the obviousness of God. Thank you to all those who have watched the conversation. It was really fun to take the opportunity to meet with Paul, get to know more about him, and just to talk theology and apologetics and biblical studies subjects with him. And it's the most watched video on my channel, more than 8,000 views, so thank you to all those who watched the conversation. Also, the most engagement in terms of comments, 260 plus comments according to YouTube. So I wanted to run through a few of those comments here. Hey, very good questions here. First, I do want to push back a little bit on the idea that because we're in the year 2023, every culture is well aware that other cultures exist and have different views. I think humans have known this for a very long time. It's even explicit in the Old Testament. So if you wanted to go back thousands of years, it's explicit that Yahweh is the God of the Israelites and that there are other gods out there that people worship. So I think this idea that there's a cultural capitalization from one God against the others, I mean, it's been around for a while, this idea. At any rate, so the real heart of the question here is, how can Christians connect the dot and guarantee that Christianity is the only true religion? This is a good question. It's also a separate question than dealing with the obviousness of God. When we're dealing with the obviousness of God, we're thinking of a general creator. You might even say God or gods if you were so disposed to think in that direction. And so I'm not saying that Christianity is obviously true. That takes more effort. I am an evidentialist in this regard with regard to Christianity. And so that does take some work showing the truthfulness of Christianity. So maybe that helps a little bit, and that wasn't the subject of what we got into. Of course, that's a whole great discussion to be had, but just want to be clear on what the conversation was originally about and how those connecting the dots occur. So you go from recognizing that there is a creator of the universe to determining whether that creator has revealed himself or herself or itself or themselves, and what that looks like more specifically. And I think that's where Christianity offers some answers far and away better than other religions. All right, next question. Arthur, thanks for your comment. I had a very pleasurable time chatting with Paul, and in my past experiences in communications with Bart Ehrman, I've also enjoyed my talks with him both in person, live, privately, and publicly, and then just the content, creating that Misquoting Ehrman series, which Bart was kind enough to share all 6 videos at his site. I think it can be helpful to, in this regard, build bridges, if you will, to other sides, and we can be charitable and reasonable with each other while not getting and I would even argue we could even get passionate, as long as each side recognizes our passion and the respect that we have for each other. Sometimes it's when people get passionate that things get heated, and that's when things can turn sour. So people's experiences vary. Between, you mentioned, in your experience about which side being more reasonable and charitable than the other, people's experiences can vary. So, I'm sorry to hear that, at least in your experiences, you've had some bad experiences from the religious side on this front. So hopefully there will be more experiences like this video conversation that you enjoyed. Very good question. I think it demonstrates a validation of a spiritual dimension. But you're right that it's not on its own a closed case for one view over the other. And so if we had to get more into specifics on how this makes sense on the Christian framework, I think that the Christian God does hear prayers of non-Christian people. And so God still providentially works in the affairs of humans. Even Jesus says this in the Gospels when he says that God makes it rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God knows, the amount of hairs on your head, and he also provides for the birds of the air. These are general truths about the world and the way that God has made it. so that the Creator God even provides for humans who do not worship him or know of him. Okay, well, actually, I think there are obvious truths, which are obvious to even some people, but are not obvious to others. So that's something that Paul and I think got into a little bit. And so the fact that there are truths which are obvious, obvious to be known, doesn't mean that we wouldn't be having the conversation, because there are some people to which that truth is not obvious. So I disagree. I think it is obvious that God exists. Let's read this again. Theists have had thousands of years to present evidence for God or gods. And I think that evidence is all around. And the vast majority of humans today and in history past have also recognized that evidence. So atheists are the minority percent. It depends on how you're counting heads, but Pew Research frequently puts out somewhere between 4 to 6, maybe 10% if you're lumping in the people who prefer not to be the nuns. They prefer not to be labeled, but usually once you dig into the nuns and data on them, they do think that there's a creator, or they do think there's a spiritual world. So you're certainly not talking about naturalists at that point. So at any rate, atheists and agnostics make up just a very small percentage of the human population. So at some point you sort of have to ask this question, well, who's more likely to be right or wrong? Is it the vast majority of humans today and throughout history who are right on this, or is it the small percentage? So, and I think it's the vast majority in this case. Sometimes, majority doesn't determine truth. I'll say that, but it can be an indicator of one direction over the other. I don't think that lying is the apologist's primary means of argumentation. Lying would require that someone knows a truth and they are intentionally misstating the facts. And so I think at a minimum you should say something like, I think at most you should say something like, Christian apologists are extremely mistaken, extremely wrong about this. But I don't think that we should say that they're lying. That's a whole different dimension. And it's really hard to prove motive. You need a lot of evidence to prove motive. Very good question. Interestingly enough, if you look at the statistics on evangelicalism, evangelicalism is stable or slightly growing in society. It's the mainline denominations who, in fact, have gone more progressive on the particular issues you mentioned that are declining. And so what explains that shift? Well, I think that churches that shift with the culture instead of being, say, cultural leaders, churches that shift with the cultural trends, they don't offer anything different. And so on my Christian view, what I see are the churches that are consistent with historic orthodoxy. They're the ones that are stable or slightly growing, at least in America. Now, the way you phrase this question, we are also only looking at, say, American history. But if you look at the growth of Christianity globally, if you look at the global South and the majority world, then your comment doesn't really fit, because we're seeing Christianity explode globally. So yeah, it all depends on how you're viewing this question specifically, and I think that it's just limited to America right now. So yeah, it is a good question. What explains these differences? So what happens to Christianity 100 years from now? Well, I mean, what happens to American Christianity 100 years from now? I mean, that remains to be seen. We'll have to revisit your comment in 50 years' time if we both make it that long. Yes, technical nuance. You are technically correct. That would be right when we're speaking of a blood brother. So half brother. So forgive me if I misspoke or I was unclear in my language. The chair makes it look like the Christian has horns. Looks like a great chair. Are you talking about this chair? Cypher, I'm glad you enjoyed the discussion. I did as well. And I guess I'll have to think about, is it because this pillow, this is like a leather pillow. By the way, this is a gaming chair. You know, office desk chairs, I just have never been very comfortable for me. I work in an office, this office here, and spend many hours a day here, so I wanted to get something that's comfortable. I even have a little lumbar support pillow back here. But yeah, it's quite comfortable. There are times I just need to relax, and you know, whereas an office chair, I might be upright for too long. So thanks. Yeah, got it on Amazon. I think it's pretty cheap. But yeah, I'll think about maybe putting like a Veracity Hill throw blanket. That might work. Veracity, by the way, is habitual truthfulness. So that's where I got the name, and it's a play off of one of Jesus' teaching of being a city on a hill, and so Veracity Hill, that's where I got the name. Well, previously I talked about a little on the obviousness of God. You think it's obvious God is not obvious. I don't hold that position. And then you said, if you know, we wouldn't be having these sort of debates. Like I mentioned before, just because a truth might be obvious to some people or not obvious to others, I mean, we can grant certain obvious truths as fact, and people would still be having these debates. So we could think of some analogies. We'd go back and forth, but I'm sure there'd be some point where we'd find common ground on this issue where you and I might think there's an obvious truth. Someone else disagrees that it's obvious, and all of a sudden we're having a debate. So let's find that common ground to illustrate the point that the fact that the debate exists is not evidence against the truth in question. Okay, well, I've run through a number of comments, and you know, I'm happy to work through more. If you want to send more my way, send some comments you want me to engage with. Thanks again to those new subs, and if you don't yet subscribe to the Veracity Hill channel, check it out. And yeah, I'll keep engaging with you guys online. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad that you've enjoyed that conversation, and I do hope that there will be more conversations with Paul, and also just more conversations between atheists and Christians that are performed in the spirit of civility and respect for each other. And it stems out of the reason why I take this approach that I do is because it stems from my love of humanity, my love for humans, every human, who I think is created in the image of God, and they are my neighbor. And you know, Jesus instructs Christians to love your neighbor, and so this is sort of an aspect of my ministry and the outworkings of what I think Jesus teaches. So hopefully this can be an example for you and for other Christians to follow in how we should engage in these sorts of conversations. So, hey, if you got video ideas, feel free to suggest them in the comments. And thanks for the participation.